Hello, everyone out there in radio land. It is once again that time of the week. This next section, so I am going to hone in on a very important story about kind of, the broader um, context of kind of social democrats and in modern movements and also in Congress. Talking about AOC and I'm going to preface this by saying, there's a reason that this specific story really like got a bug in my ear, and I think is a little different than some of what we've talked about in the past, because we've been a little bit more deferential on the show in some of the left wing criticisms of AOC. Uh, so going back to in December, there was a whole. I'm not going to go into the details of this whole force the vote thing and bad political strategies and all that. But recently, there's been some things that kind of I think should rub any lefty the wrong way, whether you are a communist or a DSA member, and it really it's where the rubber hits the road. It has to do with money, and it does tie into some things in the past that I think are worth bringing up. Now, I think again, I'm speaking as somebody who I'm explicitly like a Marxist-Leninist, and I don't really believe in reforming the current American political system or capitalism more generally. But I think people like AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida, Bernie, they have served and they continue to serve a really critical role in like on-roading people to socialist ideas and praxis. And for some of my bitter, more like maybe ultra left or Trotsky listeners, like how many socialists did you know before 2016? I mean, I'm just like, let's just yeah. It has really worked to get people re-engaged, get Americans re-engaged with these ideas again, above and beyond what they actually are offering ideologically. So, like AOC is not really that socialisty of a democratic socialist or a social democrat, but even just reintroducing socialism to the American vocabulary has been pretty valuable. That being said, there was there was a recent interview and some donations that I think really raised some eyebrows. One kind of scolding socialists who are critical of the Biden administration, and for one thing, again, somebody who's actually in Congress, they have to walk a much different line than I would as a commentator, or you would as like just a community member talking about these issues on Facebook. And I try to explain this too, bearing it down to local politics. So some of I've run for office here in town before, and I've run as explicitly as like a Marxist socialist. There's a certain kind of like very tightrope you have to walk, where you are, critiquing the system. You don't want to be outright rude to other people in the community you might have to work with. Even like during the campaign, when I did have to criticize other political figures in the community, like David Anderson, for example, it was all very based on like facts and policy, etc. Tried not to get too like personal and stuff with it. And we should also understand, there's a little bit of when you stare into the abyss, does the abyss stare back to you? And there is a ton of Marxist analysis and literature that speaks to the idea that people go into the system with good intentions, but they end up, because by virtue of being part of that system, they start taking on some of the counter-revolutionary elements of that system, internalizing it. I think one could make a point that talking about criticism of the Biden administration as bad faith and kind of like turning these things around is a bit of an example of that. When you are in the system for X amount of time, you are, even like Bernie Sanders, who so outwardly is like, I'm running against the establishment in like 2016. He still describes a lot of these folks as his friends, his co-workers, etc. And that's like a different metric that you have to keep in mind when you are surrounded by that. That being said, it is kind of a different degree of some of the stuff we've criticized before. I think like one of our early criticisms, like, when right about the year after Steve was elected, kind of this thing about how like it's classist to expect people to read socialist theory and if you look at the history of the really successful socialist groups in this country, it was those who were able to explain all of that complex socialist theory to regular working class folks. Some people were even, literate. One of my favorite examples, the Communist Party of Alabama. Those were primarily poor black sharecroppers, around the Great Depression. But you were able, all of them had like this kind of knowledge of Leninism, Marxism, like the history of like, and concurrent communist movements going on at the time. And again, these are just regular folk, some of whom didn't even know how to read. But again, when you invest time and energy into community education, you can get a lot from that. But okay, so what am I getting to? Because I think I've circled around the point a little bit too long. What is the big thing that is making me talk about it on the show? And let me emphasize. So this is where money talks and BS walks. And as we call out the BS on the show, this may be, I think, like the most and there's been other things you could point out. I think she's been a little mealy mouthed on imperialism time to time, but this particular aspect, and it doesn't bode well for the kind of social democrat progressive movement overall if we're going to like take on these tactics. But there was this recent controversy about her donating money to ostensibly these like kind of centrist corporate Democrats. And I'm just gonna say bottom line, I think like whatever the intention was, that's just not. I don't understand those chess moves, and I maybe like I could hypothesize the intent behind them, but I don't want to get into the whole like game theory of that. But whatever it shakes out, you're still giving money that was raised in the grassroots for progressive candidates to candidates that are ostensibly standing against what you stand for, and even other well-known people, alumni from that kind of progressive wave. Paula Jean Swearengin actually came out on Twitter and was very critical of this move of, donating this grassroots money to kind of centrist Democrats. And there's this article from the World Socialist website, who, again, I don't agree with them on everything, but they put this on, like, money has consequences. Giving money to certain particular political figures has like real meaning beyond just trying to like make them friendlier towards you. I don't know. It's if you're against the material interests of their donors, they're never going to be friendly to you, or they're going to just pretend. Again, we could spend a lot of time like hypothesizing of like what particular chess game this was, but let's talk a little bit like, okay, so who are these people who got money, and why should we be distressed about it? And there's actually a follow-up to a couple years ago. We interviewed a fellow from World Socialist website about his series on CIA Democrats. In 2018, there were several Democrats running all over the country who disproportionate number of them had very close ties to the military-industrial complex or the intelligence agencies. And there's a through line that you could draw between these recent financial donations and that. So some of the beneficiaries of this, it was about $160,000 in campaign funds that were donated to this slate of right-wing congressional Democrats, many of them with these same intelligence and military backgrounds. They included Michigan's own Alyssa Slotkin, who was a former CIA agent, Connor Lamb, a Marine captain and military prosecutor, Tom Milanowski, an assistant secretary of state under Barack Obama, Abigail Spanberger, a CIA operations officer, Elaine Luria, a Navy commander. Excuse me. No. Elaine Luria, Mikey Sherrill, a Navy pilot, Andy Kim, advisor to the U.S. Military Command, and Jared Golden, Maine, a Marine infantryman. Um, Also worth noting, both Slotkin and Lamb said they're sending the donations back. Um, Now there's this whole argument to be made that, like, we need to make progressive policies more palatable to people on the ground. And I think it is kind of silly that they would give this money back out of fear of, like, being branded with, like, AOC and stuff. But the thing is, reactionary propaganda does work wonders, and, like, it tells you a lot about misogyny, and racism, that AOC can be made into a boogeyman, whereas you can't necessarily do that as easily with someone like Bernie Sanders, who a lot of those very same people tend to like in various opinion polls. Um, but again, let's circle back to kind of really the problematic nature of these donations. Um, so AOC's financial support for the CIA Democrats, it's transferring funds given to her by left-wing supporters to them, and it's as the article says, it's provides an example in financial terms of the fundamental political dynamic of right-wing Democratic Party politics. Far from moving the Democratic Party to the left, AOC, intentionally or not, is basically pooling left-wing social opposition and resources towards the very same figures who would seek to disarm it and basically maintain the sort of right-wing capitalist hegemony that we have here in the United States. Also, very materially, that money being sent to the CIA Democrats really undermines a lot of her opposition to war and imperialism. She's literally providing direct financial support to these individuals who are responsible for U.S.-led wars that have devastated broad swaths of the Middle East, killed over 1 million people in the last 2 decades alone. And like, let's talk a little bit more about these figures. Alyssa Slotkin, is a CIA agent. She was also the Iraq director for the National Security Council under Obama, serving as a senior assistant to John Negroponte in his final government job as director of national intelligence, with overall responsibility for all 19 U.S. intelligence agencies. The fact that she's financially supporting a former aide to Negroponte, that's really significant because he was the U.S. ambassador to Honduras from 1981 to 1985. He oversaw U.S.-backed death squad Contras in the civil wars in Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua. He is a war criminal. He's responsible for facilitating genocidal campaigns against Central American workers and peasants. Going on to say, in 2018, Negroponte issued endorsements of Alyssa Slotkin's campaign. He said, "I've seen her under extreme pressure working on some of the toughest security challenges our nation faces. I'm supporting Alyssa in her run for Congress." So basically, a 1980s coup operator is endorsing somebody that got progressive money through whatever this strategy was. Certainly like Connor Lamb, he's a former military officer and federal prosecutor. In July 2018, as the Trump administration took children out of the hands of their parents to enforce its fascistic zero tolerance policy, Lamb was one of several Democrats who voted for a resolution introduced by the far-right Republican Clay Higgins praising ICE. The resolution praised the brave men and women who enforce our nation's immigration laws and opposed calls to defund or abolish the Gestapo-like agency. The donation to Abigail Spanberger in November of 2020. She was an ex-CIA officer, and this is very interesting. Like, why donate to a person who said this? She launched a vicious denunciation of socialism. She blamed figures like AOC for Democratic losses in the congressional elections, even though a lot of the data we've seen that's panned out said a lot of those losses were because Democrats were not progressive enough. But anyway, in a recorded call among House Democrats at the time, Spanberger said, "We need to not ever use the word socialist or socialism ever again." So there's more that goes in that article. And again, if you want to read the whole thing, that's World Socialist website. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez funds the CIA Democrats, written by Eric London. A couple of things to point out, just like, again, A couple of important takeaways. Um, these figures, even if you are, a Marxist-Leninist or a communist, I think it's important to engage with how these figures, on-road people towards other socialist ideas or theory, and also how it interacts with the progressive movement. Because, again, the leftist movement overall in America is still in a very embryonic and young stage. It is reconstituting itself after basically being, completely dismantled in the 70s and 80s. It is really important to see how like the new left is projecting itself politically, and I think this is probably like the height of criticism that I've had since the wave of the squad has come in, because you gotta keep in mind, like, I get it, there's like this behind the scenes dance that you have to do when you are actually an elected member of a government body. But at the same time, like, this is a line I really think you don't cross. You do not use working people's money to support corporate stooges, or in this case, former war criminals and former members of the military industrial complex. You do not feed people who support and are part and parcel with imperialism with money from people who are trying to give you money to help bring about a better, more progressive living situation. It's probably the biggest misstep I have seen since they got elected, and I just don't under this. This is not going to do anything good other than I just see it just could be a really big point of demoralization, because, as somebody who's been part of these progressive politics for like about 7 years now, where politicians spend their money and where that money goes is a really, really important part of people's political analysis in the United States. Whatever, whether you are a baby leftist or you're emerging, you probably started by looking at open secrets and figuring out where politicians get their money from. So the people that do pay attention to this stuff super closely, there is no, I don't see any scenario where they're going to have like a good reaction to it. And like, some people have been making these kind of like 4-dimensional chess arguments about like, well, this is, she's behind the scenes, she's trying to curry favor with this, that, or what have you. And it's like, I understand that, but I really don't see where the benefits are going to outweigh the deltas in this case, when again, you are giving grassroots money that's meant to fund social democrats to the problem, to put a fine point on it. All right. So that's you want to read that full article? It's a World Socialist website. And there's lots of other commentary kind of just flowing around on the internet about this, but I think a lot of it doesn't necessarily focus on the right stuff. It's more about like, again, trying to hypothesize behind the scenes strategies, or it's just full on saying like, well, she's a sellout now, she's a centrist, she was evil this entire time. And it's like, no, that's not a nuanced example. It's more, what is more instructive to movement organizing is looking at how well-meaning people can make missteps, where they can go the wrong direction. As I like to point out, Barack Obama, the drone bomber and deporter in chief, was once a community organizer on the south side of Chicago. It is far more instructive to look at like how do those types of figures get gobbled into the system? How do they end up making decisions that are counter to the movements they sprung from? How can we avoid those? And how much, and this is an important critical discussion piece, how much is that kind of proof to the unreformability of the political system? This is a debate that is had between social democrats and Marxists and all that. It's an important debate to have. It's one we have on our show a lot. Yeah, it's like, hey, who knows? Maybe if I won that election 2 years ago, I'd be saying a lot nicer things about the city of Kalamazoo. I mean, it's granted, there are examples of people who don't do that. Kashama Sawant out of Seattle is a really great example of somebody who's really stuck to their guns while still being inside the machine, so to speak. So it can be done. There are examples we can look at. Again, very difficult in the American context, but as a nation left movement is emerging in the United States, we need to be very clear-eyed about what these problems are, how to address them, and also be able to explain dialectically how these contradictions emerge. All right.